I'm super excited to be here with you all today. We are going to be discussing, as Alina said, our benchmark report, which some of you may have already downloaded and seen, but we're going to be covering some new and different topics than what we've presented when we initially released this in April at our Satisfied first annual summit. But a little bit before we jump into that and some real life examples around what dealers are doing to achieve that benchmark that we've published is a little introduction about Satisfied for those of you who may not be familiar or just be hearing about us for the first time. We have been working with equipment dealers as well as manufacturers since we started in 1998. So our focus has been very specific around empowering dealers like yourselves that work in maybe ag or construction, trucking, rentals, material handling, you name it, to help them improve both the customer and employee experience. We've been able to do that through a lot of automation and integration. So this is a really big part of our platform and our services is trying to integrate with those key systems that you already work with today. And that makes the process a lot easier to implement as well as manage. We completely understand how busy our clients are, you yourselves as dealership staff, and having to take on more and more. And our three solutions, if you're not familiar with, but we'll of course be talking about each one of these today as we look at the benchmark data, is our voice of customer solution. And so that provides an opportunity to gather feedback from your customers. It's a bit more in depth to really understand how their experience is, better understand what their expectations are, which are always changing and evolving, and better meet them where their needs are. And so that's a fully automated, full service solution that we provide. And our other solution is our voice of employee. So this is something we've been talking about a lot. I would say in the last 2 to 3 years, there's definitely been more of an interest and focus on the voice of the employee. And mainly just because of the shortages we faced in general with hiring, staffing, it's really important that we work to retain the employees we have. Like, how can we keep these people that we want? And through engagement and providing them with a voice to better understand what their needs are and how to keep them happy. Our voice of employee solution does that and can also be used to attract new talent as well. And then lastly, we'll talk about reputation management, which is sort of new and up and coming in our space as far as heavy equipment goes. But something we're all very familiar with, I think, when it comes to leaving reviews online for maybe restaurants that we dine at or hotels we stay at. And we're seeing more of an interest with this, both on the employee and customer side for feedback for dealerships. So we help dealerships take a more proactive approach to soliciting feedback as well as managing the feedback that's now being published publicly online versus just maybe coming back to you privately through a feedback channel that you may already have in place. So with that said, we'll get into talking a little bit about the benchmark report. But before we do so, I wanted to recognize some of our Satisfied partners. Our success that we have today has been attributed to dealerships like the ones listed here. There's many more, but we continue to get better based on feedback from our clients as well as prospects on what some of the challenges are that they're facing today and how we can provide solutions. So whether or not we're working with you or have had conversations before, if there's some sort of challenge that you're facing that you really could use assistance with, feel free to reach out. Satisfied has always had sort of open doors and willing to listen, whether or not we have something that fits, but we'd love to find ways to make things better for each and every one of you. Okay. So our 2022 Customer and Employee Experience Benchmark Report was released in April. And through doing this, we've looked back at the data that we collected during the 2022 calendar year. And so we've been able to publish some interesting benchmark data from the customers who work with us. And it's specific to your industry. So we benchmark data based on a couple different ways, right? We look at industry specific. So while this is specific to heavy equipment, we do provide some interesting data that relates maybe just to ag versus construction, trucking, looking at dealership size. There's a lot of interesting data that we pull back from, the various 1,000+ dealerships that we work with today across North America, as well as some of our partners that we work with in Australia. And it's really interesting to take a look at what do we see trending in the current year over this past year, and where should we be focused? So with that, let's take a look at the data that we've collected. And in the contents of the benchmark report, there's a lot more in here than what we're going to cover today in today's session. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview and highlight of the data, but I highly suggest downloading it. Hopefully you all have a smartphone nearby. There's a QR code you can scan on the screen to download the report. If you happen to be on your mobile device listening, that's fine too. We'll email you a link following today's session with the recording for today, and that will include a link to download the benchmark report as well. But here we're looking at just the contents of the report. So we're going to talk about key performance indicators in the report. There is an executive summary, and then we'll sort of deep dive into the analysis as it relates to both customer and employee, and then as well as the online reputation. One of our key goals whenever we're providing information, or even today's webinar session, is that you walk away with some actionable items. So we hope that there's something you can walk away with from even today's session or reading this benchmark report that you can take back and implement in the dealership in the next week or two, so relatively soon. And then we hope that we also can provide you with some thought around things that you should be considering for future strategy implementation. Now, those things may be further down the road. For some of you, it may be planning that you're looking at even for 2024 coming up. A lot of our dealers' fiscal years start here in the fall in October, which is kind of hard to believe, but we're getting into that fourth quarter and the end of 2023. And so what should be some of our goals? And we'll talk about that as we get further into today's session. And then there's a little bit of information about Satisfied. So let's start with a little preview of the data that we saw as it relates to the customer experience and go from there. So here what we're looking at is the customer experience benchmark data. And when we were taking a look at the data collected from 2022, what stood out to us to be most interesting was the variation in Net Promoter Score. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, there's some information around NPS on our website. But when we asked that question of how likely it is you are to recommend this dealership, the scores were broken down in such a way that it was interesting that there was a pretty significant difference between our smaller dealership groups and our larger dealership groups. And one of the reasons why we chose to focus in on this is there's definitely been a lot of movement in the industry over the last few years. It sort of continues to be this trend of growing dealerships, and they tend to be getting larger and larger. And so what is the impact of that? So to think about, if you're a dealership that's maybe looking to make an acquisition or maybe recently has made one, start to think about, how is this change of our growth going to be impacting our customers? And so traditionally what we've seen here is that our smaller dealerships have done quite well. We're looking at a small dealership, just to clarify, is anyone from 1 to 5 locations. And so that group last year had a 86 Net Promoter Score. So quite a bit above our larger dealership groups, which was at a 78. The large dealership groups here, we've identified those as being 20+ locations. And I'll say that we've sort of increased that as we talked about large dealerships. I think years back, we would always say 10+ locations, but as you guys all continue to get larger and larger, 10 isn't that large anymore when we've got groups that are, 50+ out there. And then our mid-sized dealers, which we consider to be 6 to 19 locations, fairly similar Net Promoter Score, and actually just slightly below our large dealers. And one of those things was we actually saw the large dealer net promoter score, while it's always trended to be lower than the small dealers, is that it increased from 2021 to 2022 when we went back and looked at the benchmark data. So with that said, I think it's something that we just want to keep in mind, the customer experience, the impact that it has on our customers as we tend to grow and we go through these transition times and phases. And there's a couple key takeaways that I think would be really important that we wanted to discuss. So I know we've talked about this data in our summit that we had earlier this year when we released the benchmark report. But I wanted to focus a little bit more on today, what it is that you guys should be doing and paying attention to. Again, these are sort of those key action items that, you know, if you want to get out a pad paper and jot something down or, you know, listen to the recording later, these are things I think I would, you know, notate and share within the organization. So the first one is meeting customer expectations. So what we talked about is that being aware of the benchmark. So I think just being here today and making yourself more aware of what's going on in the industry, great job, right? First and foremost is just having that awareness, and then sort of getting an understanding of where you're at. So kind of think about yourself. What group do you fall in when we talk about size? Where are you headed? Maybe when it relates to size, if you know something's coming up, is to understand that these dealerships are getting better, right? Our large dealers are continuing to increase. Customer expectations are increasing. Don't let yourself be the one that sort of falls behind when it comes to customer expectations. So whether or not you're utilizing a platform like ourselves, or most of you today have an OEM program where you're getting feedback. There's many ways in which you can be getting customer feedback today. It could be through the Google reviews, right? Where customers are just organically going out there and leaving feedback. Is, you know, pay attention to that. Don't ignore it. And just know that competition is continuing to increase in the equipment space, and it's going to become ever more important that you are staying on top of the customer feedback you have and meeting customers' expectations as they continue to increase and the competition continues to get better and better. The next key focus, and this is probably not going to be a surprise to anybody, and people are probably sitting here going, this has already been my primary point of focus, is the service department. I think the service department definitely demands a lot of your energy and attention, both as it relates to the employee experience and customer experience. And we'll talk about the impact with the employee experience when we get to that, because there's definitely some takeaways as it relates to the service department as well. But it's been a challenge from a staffing perspective long before COVID, long before you know, the sort of great resignation that we faced, where people were, you know, leaving jobs left and right. And so it's only gotten harder, and that impacts the customer experience, right? As you have a harder time fitting work into the schedule and meeting their expectations, trying to prevent downtime, etc. And so this definitely needs to be a core focus of the dealership. I think continue to put the service department at the forefront. Don't let it fall to the back burner. I think some of the suggestions that we have as it relates to the employee experience are going to be some really great takeaways, because that's going to have a direct correlation to the customer experience as it comes to servicing equipment as well. So let's make sure that we keep that on the forefront. I know you guys are all putting forth a lot of efforts to recruit more technicians. I think the key thing is, once we get those technicians in the door, is how do we keep them there and not lose them? That'll be key to the employee experience as well as the customer experience. So the third takeaway is having process-oriented leaders. And so a lot of this, again, is with dealership growing in size, you're becoming more sophisticated organizations, and even for some of our smaller dealer groups that are maybe going from 1 to 3 locations or 3 to 5 locations, is that having processes in place are going to be critical. It's really important that we can have a consistent way of doing business across multi-location dealerships, and we want to have some common form, a way of being able to measure those processes and performance, so that when things arise, like we start to see trends maybe on the customer experience where something starts to trend downward, how are we going to identify the cause of that and course correct, right? How can we implement changes across the organization that will impact everyone and not be just do those things in isolation? And so it's going to be a key part of moving forward into 2024. And then the last piece of this that I want to give you as a takeaway is looking at a full competitive analysis. So one of the reasons why we wanted to share this benchmark report was just to create more visibility for all of the dealers in this space today. It's everyone. So we talked about, we look at like ag and we look at construction. Sometimes we look at product lines like OEMs and looking at how performance is related. But just know that as we talk about the marketplace becoming more and more competitive in the heavy equipment space, it's going to be ever more important to be measuring those things. So we've got a couple, an interesting thing for you to take away at the end of today's session that I want to make sure we cover, just so you can get a glimpse of where you are as it relates to your local competitors. And so we'll cover that as well, because I think it's a really great place to start, and it's really easy to do as well, just to create some visibility for yourself. All right, so that was all about customer, and now we're going to transition into our employee experience. As I mentioned, and you've heard me say, there is a direct correlation between employee Net Promoter Score and customer NPS. But one of the biggest differences is when we talk about a good NPS score. And I didn't mention this, but obviously you saw the scores as we looked at dealerships by size. The average was an 80 NPS, quite high. And I think if you were to Google quickly what the good NPS score, they're going to say anything over 50, right? Because that NPS score could be anywhere from a -100 to a +100. Now, on the employee side, significantly different. And whenever we're bringing on a new client, we always need to make sure that they have expectations around what their Net Promoter Score is going to be, especially if they have experience, most likely on the customer side, whether it's from working with us or utilizing their OEM customer feedback process. Employee Net Promoter Scores are significantly lower. So what we see as a good score is anything from a 5 to a 20. And so that is quite a bit lower, nowhere near 80, right? So keep that in mind. Again, the Net Promoter Score is using the question of how likely it is that you are to recommend this dealership, right, to a friend or colleague. It's a great place to work, right? Would you say, come work at my dealership? And in this case, it's very similar. There is an interesting breakdown of the Net Promoter Scores by size, which is something we get asked about as well. Our definitely smaller dealership groups, to no surprise, have a little bit more intimate relationships and tend to be on those high performing sides of a 20 or above. But the large dealership groups, again, are making some real improvements over the last year. And so we've seen the benchmark increase from 2021 to 2022. And so as these dealerships are growing, while they are aware that their scores are typically lower, they're continuing to get better. And again, when we talk about this being such a competitive environment, it really is on the employee side. And we're pulling from people from all the same industries, like on the technician side. It's really competitive, and I know you guys are all aware of this. And so this is definitely something that we need to put a lot of focus in on. And you guys are investing so much money in recruiting staff to come work at the dealership. That investment should be equal, or if not greater, on the retention side. So what are you doing today to keep staff in place? How are you keeping them happy? How are you providing them with a voice? How are you becoming aware of what it is that their thoughts and feelings are? Because I think a lot of times we think we know the engagement or sentiment of our staff, but do we really? So start to ask yourself those questions. I think it's really important. What am I doing to allow them to provide some feedback? Where can I get that information from? And some of you may be already doing that through internal processes. Could be the old suggestion box that you have, could be an employee voice of employee program as well. So I know that there's quite a wide range there, but I think the key thing is what can we do to keep these employees that we want, right? We've spent a lot to recruit them. We've brought them in, and what can we do to keep them there? So again, some of the key takeaways as we look at the employee experience, and this is interesting as we look at the result really more in depth on the employee side, is communication has been really critical. So for staff, they really want to know, what's going on in the dealership. And so I think we've seen people try to do a good job of communicating, but there's a lot more to it than just sort of telling, leadership telling staff like, hey, this is what's going on in the dealership. It is a two-way process. So listening and providing them with that voice is a really big component, right, of the communication piece. And I think sometimes we get really focused in on just communicating as a one-way street. So make sure you've got that as a two-way street, that leadership's communicating to the rest of staff what's going on, what direction we're headed in, from a strategy perspective, down to more day-to-day stuff as well, but also providing a way for staff to communicate back. And so a couple things are just to takeaways. Think about that, make sure that we're being positive and encouraging them to provide a voice as well. So efficient execution was something that we saw in the data as an area for improvement as well. So this is something that we would recommend that you focus in on at your dealership. And part of this is going to be setting clear goals and objectives. So communication, again, ties back to that first takeaway as well, is going to be really important, but also empowering employees is another key part of that. And I think we try to tell our staff or our clients as they're going about driving change based on the results of like the employee survey process, is it takes a while, right? It may take you 6 to 12 months to actually, initiate some change and start to see results of those. While you're in it and you're the one maybe leading this charge, the staff may have forgotten that this is related to the feedback they provided. And so one of the things you want to do when you're being really effective here in communicating and executing these changes is tying it back to the root of where this came from. And so just continue to remind staff too that the feedback was important. This is what we're doing based on the feedback that's collected, whether you guys are asking for staff to provide feedback on their own or they're utilizing a third-party service, is that they'll forget, right? Time goes by, it's been months, right? They're focused on what they're doing next. And so people don't really remember that. So make sure that you are empowering them by reminding them about, why you're doing what you're doing. That's a really big part of the process. And then their involvement is so important in these processes. So we have found, and I think we've seen from a lot of our clients who are successful, is that they really include the team. And we'll talk about some of this in our real life examples coming up. But one of the key pieces to engagement is making them feel a part of the process. Aside from letting them have a voice and reminding them why you're doing this, is let them be a part of that decision making. Let them have some influence over what happens. And versus everything being sort of dictated down to them. I think, our cultures are changing. I think we've seen some significant shifts in the last couple of years, just generally speaking, even outside of our industry, of things moving more towards the employee, versus the employer. employees feel very different about their relationship with their employer and sort of, having a job at this place of employment. It's a much different dynamic now than I think it used to be even 5-10 years ago. And so creating that culture of employee driven participation by employees in decision making, as well as sort of just their involvement, is going to be a real big win towards engagement and retention. And I think you'll see some significant results by implementing that third takeaway that we're giving you here today. So that one may be a little bit further off, not something that you can do immediately, but as you start to think about your planning for next year, how can you incorporate that more so into the day-to-day life for some of your employees, for maybe your particular area of responsibility? Whether you're a service director or a marketing manager, how can I enable my staff to have more authority, right? And influence over decisions and be able to participate more in what they're doing and from there. So those are a couple takeaways as it relates to employee experience. All right, so benchmarking data that's been released about reputation management, which is what's most commonly called for our marketers on the call today, and for other areas of responsibility in the business, this also impacts you as well. So listen, I think this is going to become more and more important. I think we've definitely seen an interest here in the last couple of years. I'm sure if I asked each one of you in a poll to say, have you ever left a review before? Most of you are going to raise a hand. And so, I think everyone would certainly raise their hand to say that they've read a review. So this is going to be really important. And keep in mind, it's not just about customers. We're going to talk about customers, but also employees. So employees are reading reviews on Google when you are out recruiting and looking to hire new employees. They, of course, are looking at those reviews on Glassdoor before maybe they come in for an interview or apply for a job. So this is something really important for all aspects of the business. But the data we've collected has been much more focused in our benchmark report around customer feedback as it relates to reviews. I will say that industry-wide, dealerships are doing a fantastic job when it comes to their rating online. So little pat yourself on the back there, because you guys are averaging over 4.5 stars, which is great. That is definitely leading. In general, they say you want to have a 4.2 rating. And so we are clearly exceeding that, which is fantastic. But there's definitely some general struggles in the industry. And those things are related to specifically recency and volume. So those are the three areas that we measure when it comes to benchmarking. The rating, I think everyone's familiar with, right? The stars. But recency is going to be related back to when did my last review come in. And then volume is going to be around the total number of reviews. So the dealerships that we work with today, so this data, they're doing a lot better than most. Part of that's just because we have an automated process that allows us to get their customer information through integrations with their business system to be able to allow them to proactively ask customers for reviews. And so that allows them to get more recent reviews constantly coming in on a regular basis. So their recency scores are really great. Same thing with the volume. They have a strong number of reviews for each one of their stores, just because of the fact that they are proactively asking for customer feedback on, Google as an example. But industry-wide, I would say recency and volume is where things tend to be more of a challenge for dealers who are maybe not taking a proactive approach, or they are, but are doing so manually. It can be a lot of demand on your current resources and staff, which are already sort of capped at the moment. I think everyone feels that way, that there's just not enough people to do the work that needs to get done. And so whatever we can do to embrace technology to create more automated processes is going to improve things and make things that much better. So I think as we look at some of the key takeaways as it relates to reputation management, I'm going to give you a couple things that we really want to focus in on for this upcoming year, and maybe even some more soon to be takeaways. But customer service is really important. People are increasing their expectations and demands around the experience that they're provided. I don't think the word experience, I remember a few years ago being back here talking about customer experience, and we were like, nobody knows what experience means outside of satisfied. We can't use the word experience with dealers, but we've become sort of this experiential environment, right? Society. I think everywhere we go is sort of an experience, like going out to a restaurant. It's not just about the food, but it's about the entire experience. And so I think I can use that word now, and everyone knows what we're talking about. So it's not just about the service provided, but the full experience that they have throughout purchasing a piece of equipment with you. That sort of lifetime experience that they have interacting. So just making sure that you're creating one, that positive one, and that you are, again, because of the competitive nature of things, sort of going above and beyond what your fellow competitors are doing to create an even better experience. Something that's more memorable than the other dealerships nearby. And then the next takeaway is to really be an active participant in engaging with customers who are leaving feedback for you. So you're going to get positive reviews and you're going to get negative reviews. I think I find most of the dealers that I talk to are responding to at least the negative reviews. That's probably, I would say at a minimum, that probably, using that 80-20 rule, 80% of you are doing today when it comes to reputation management is I am managing the negative reviews. We are responding to those publicly. We are following up with the customer. So that's fantastic. That is at a minimum, right, what we all need to be doing today. If that is where you are, try responding to the positive reviews as well. So thanking them for providing their feedback is huge. When people are out there looking at your reviews, they're going to see that you've responded, and they're going to see what that response is. And even on the negative ones, right? It's really important. We know things go wrong. No one's perfect, but how you address and handle those can be really impactful to customers and future potential customers as well. Monitoring your reputation. So again, like I said, 80% of you and maybe even higher are responding to those negative reviews. Again, we're focused on the rating when doing so. So what can you do to make yourself more aware of where you are? And I'm going to give you a QR code at the end of today's session. So if you do have your phones nearby to scan, we can get you a copy of your scorecard report for all of your locations. So just be prepared to have that out so you can get that later, because the awareness of where you stand in those three categories is really important. Everyone probably knows what their rating is or can easily go look at by just Googling your dealership. But if you run the scorecard report, you'll see where you're at as it relates to your overall score when we look at recency, volume, and your rating. So let's create some more awareness. This is something that we provide free to anyone. So you guys can run this at any point in time that you want to see where you're at. And so we provide this as a free service, like I said. So I'll give you that here at the end of today's session as a takeaway. And then the last part of this, this is probably one of the most important things, but I know that it's going to take some time and it's not going to be quite as easy to do. Like becoming aware of where you're at, you can do that immediately, but getting a proactive way to get your customers to provide you with a review may take a little bit of work. So you can, one, just make it accessible for them. A lot of the dealers use in-store signage just to say, hey, we'd love a review. I see this everywhere. now. So it's something that people are becoming more familiar with. You can have your sales staff even make it a part of their process when they're doing that follow-up after the sale. That's already part of the process that you have today. Ask them for a review. So there's probably existing processes that you already have in place that you could incorporate this into. It doesn't have to be automated, right? Could be manual to start off with. We like to use the crawl, walk, run strategy at Satisfied, where how can we do this the easiest way, the simplest way initially, knowing that down the road, we'd like to be kind of running along at this more sophisticated process, but that may take time. So what is it that you could do to implement sort of that crawl stage of getting them to start asking for a review? So think about that. Think about what your processes are today and how you do that, and how can you make that a bit more standard. So here's another QR code. I just wanted to make this close up on the screen again. This is for the copy of the benchmark report. So again, feel free to scan this. If for some reason you are on your mobile device, don't worry, and you can't scan that code, we will email you again, like I said, a link, and you can download a copy of the report there. Okay, we're not done yet. So in addition to our benchmark report and those key takeaways, I wanted to share with you some real life examples of what other dealerships like yourselves are doing, because I think it's really important. You guys like to learn from one another. There's no sense in sort of reinventing the wheel, right? And starting over when somebody's already learned what works, what doesn't work. And so I wanted to share with you a couple examples of what other dealers are doing as it relates to customer experience and employee experience. So we're going to start with customers here. And again, these are some good takeaways, but some specific examples that we thought I'd share with you. So for those of you who are getting customer feedback in today, which don't say you're not getting customer feedback in, because there is feedback for you everywhere. So you may not have a process like Satisfied that's providing you with dealer-specific customer feedback, but you most likely have a manufacturer program that's providing you with some dealer feedback, even though it could be influenced by the product. You all probably have some Google reviews about each one of your locations as a means to get feedback from customers. And you know that you have customers providing feedback directly to staff, whether that be in the store, through email, online, as they're interacting with them. So start to categorize that feedback. Start to understand what it means. So one of our dealers has this great process, and I think it's wonderful that they sort of identify, and we do this through our Satisfied process, is there an issue that needs to be followed up with? So do I need to do something to go back out to this customer and have an additional conversation with them about what happened? Is there an opportunity to recognize an employee? So do we want to give kudos is a common term that we see. We use this in other applications around recognition. So is there an opportunity to recognize somebody? Oftentimes people mention specifically whether it's in, especially like a customer survey process, but even in reviews, they'll say, Jim did such a great job at, addressing my issues, make great recommendations, etc. How can we use that customer feedback to boost engagement through a kudos process? And the other thing to think about is maybe there's just some action items that need to be addressed. I don't need to necessarily follow up with my customer, but I need to make a change based on the feedback that's provided. So start to break down customer feedback into categories, which will allow you again to create more process-oriented, as we talked about the process-oriented leaders, to be able to easily, quickly respond. Like exactly what you need to do when you get this type of feedback in. How does it get routed? Who does it go to? And what do we do with it? The next example I wanted to share with you is that a lot of dealers have had success with increasing the participation rates with getting feedback from their customers by just sort of preemptively letting them know that they're going to get a survey, or we'd love to get a review, right, from you, or you may be getting an email or a text or phone call from us. Some of the dealerships actually make a courtesy phone call to their customers, excuse me, and let them know that, hey, we're going to be sending you a survey. We'd really love if you could take a minute or two to fill that out. We drive improvements based on your feedback, and it's made a significant difference. So if you have the ability to, again, incorporate this into maybe some existing processes like your follow-up after the sale, to let them know that the survey is going to be coming, or an invite, to leave a review, has a real positive impact on the engagement and participation from your customers to provide feedback. And then the last thing is, some of you either kind of love or hate this approach, but we have a lot of dealerships who've had success on incorporating customer feedback results or customer experience scores into their existing compensation plan for employees. So a lot of employees have bonus programs. So whether they're a manager, salesperson, et cetera. And part of that, a lot of dealerships will include the customer experience scores. They are then incentivized to be able to provide a better experience for the customer. They're going to follow up on those customer issues, as we talk about, like categorizing them, and make sure that those customer issues are resolved. And they're going to be more engaged when it comes to making the phone calls and letting them know that, hey, you're going to be getting the survey. They're also going to be more on board with driving change. So when we talk about, we've seen some trends where the data is showing us that we have this problem here and we need to make some changes, right? And find out how can we go about doing that. We've just seen a real increase in engagement and improvement in the customer experience scores with our dealers who do have an employee incentive program that incorporates customer experience scores. All right, a couple examples on the employee side. I think I actually just read a recent article in Farm Equipment that talked just about this, but this is something that came up on an HR panel we did earlier this year. And coincidentally enough, a lot of people in the room that spurred a lot of conversation around, what they've done in the past. And so as we talk about this competitive marketplace that we're in when it comes to hiring employees, is doing some additional benchmarking data and analysis on your compensation plans. That dealers have done this to get a better idea of where they need to be with not only just new hires, but existing staff as well. And so this has helped with retention. Again, you spent all this money to hire these people, get them trained and onboarded. Again, what do we need to do to keep them there? And so just making sure you're staying competitive in the marketplace, just as we're providing you with benchmarking data here today, make sure you are benchmarking compensation as well and staying on top of competitive salaries. And then another one to take a look at, we had a dealer who had a real down, like a dip in their employee scores. And specifically when we looked at it, their benefits sort of took a dive. And we asked questions around feedback for compensation as well as benefits and understanding the employees. And so what they did was they did sort of a deep dive analysis after they got the results. And we've seen this be really successful on both customer and employee side as our dealers become aware of an issue, is to deep dive into that particular topic. And so in this case, the dealer went and identified through additional questioning, specifically what was going on as it related to benefits, so they could understand a little bit better about what employee expectations were for their benefit packages that they were offering. So in addition to their salary, some examples would be, their 401k, health insurance, any wellness benefits that they had, etc. And so what they found out through the process was some employees were not aware of all the benefits they had, and specifically sort of the monetary value that was associated with those benefits. And they wanted to see different benefits than what they had currently. So through that process, they were able to One, learned that they needed to better communicate and outline the benefits being provided and make some adjustments to the benefits that were being provided to better meet the needs of their staff. And so this last year, they saw a significant improvement in their benefit scores. So that went up, which was great because they put a lot of effort. That was their thing they wanted to focus in on. And in turn, their net promoter, their eNPS went up, and they've been able to exceed the benchmark. So sometimes we need to just take a deep dive when we start to become aware of a more, systemic issue through either customer or employee feedback, and allow it to really drive some positive change in the organization. So the third thing that I wanted to share with you, and this is again came up recently, some dealers have shared with us because we see this on the employee experience results, is that the net promoter score for employees around like the 1 to 4 year range after they've been, on board for 1 to 4 years, which obviously you quite haven't gotten back maybe the return on your investment that you've made in them, but their net promoter score can go down, is one of the things that we were seeing. And so what they found is that there was some uncertainty with staff with regards to future employment opportunities. So that's not good, right? They're considering, should I stay here? Is there opportunity for growth and development? Or should I start looking to go elsewhere? That timing is not great for anybody, especially you as the employer, because you've just made a significant investment over that first year. Likely maybe haven't gotten that back yet. And so what they did was they've implemented a development and growth path process, right? So leadership development opportunities for staff. So those that are interested in moving forward and having future growth opportunities, they can participate in this. It allows them then to recognize that there's more opportunities within the organization. It allows you as the dealership to develop future leaders as well to take over when you start to have that natural attrition for some of your management as well. And so we saw some real positive results in this particular area for dealers who have gone down this path. And it sounded like there was a few when we discussed this of other dealerships that they talked to who had done the same thing and seen success as well. So that was one that we wanted to share with you as well. All right, so I said in the beginning, I wanted you to have a couple takeaways from today's session. That's always our goal. And there are some things that you can do immediately. Again, I know we're using QR codes because hopefully if you are at your desk and on your computer, you have your phone available. The first one is, again, the QR code for the benchmark report that we shared earlier. So if you already scanned it, you can skip this first step. Again, if you don't have your device with you, we'll email you links to all of these. The second thing is, we talked about creating some awareness. Where are you right now? So get that benchmark report, see where the industry is. Get an idea, though, of where you stand. So if you're not aware, you're not participating in our programs, and you don't have a way to see how your scores compare to the benchmark, scan this QR code. This goes to our reputation scorecard, which will allow you the ability to at least see where you stand as it relates publicly to whatever, all of your customers, potential customers are seeing about you online. So scan that code. This is something that you can do now immediately to take away with you. The last piece we have here is we have a blog piece that's coming out, and I just wanted to share with you now because I thought it was really pertinent around what we were talking about, is setting realistic goals for equipment dealerships. So there's some good takeaways here. These may be a little bit more long-term, but I think we're kind of getting into that. The end of summer's coming where we're doing a lot of planning for next year. And so this would be a really good piece for you to have, maybe read now and come back to it as well on things that you can do to help you plan for the upcoming year. So again, we'll email you links to all of these if you don't have the ability to scan the codes that are here. But these are 3 quick things you can do now to take back to your dealership and hopefully start to implement some change within the organization. I'll take employee first because that's actually kind of top of mind right now. we're sort of in our busy season for employee feedback. There tends to be two prime seasons for asking for customer feedback, which tends to be your off season, which makes sense, right? Because staff isn't as busy, they have the time to provide feedback and aren't typically like as stressed out when we are in our planting harvest for agriculture, et cetera. And so like the end of June through August tend to be a really popular time to ask for employee feedback. That then starts to pick back up again towards late November into probably I'd say through like February, maybe early March, tend to be the two most common times that we see dealers start employee processes. On the customer side, you know, that's an interesting question. I usually tell people really, you know, anytime is a great time just because getting started sooner than later is better. You know, you're missing out on a lot of key information, you know, by deferring and waiting to start. And we have ways in which we can roll things out for you that make it not overwhelming, right? And so like if there's concerns around maybe this isn't a great time, we have some processes that we have used, again, best practices, sort of real life examples with dealerships to do that. So don't fear if that is one of your concerns, reach out and we will, we can work with you to get something going that, like I said, isn't overwhelming and something that's digestible. It's a good one too. I'd say both, but you know, it starts really at home, right, with employees. So I think if you were to choose something to focus in on, let's start with employees, right? Let's keep those employees. You know, if you're having turnover and you have employees who are unhappy, that's going to create negativity with the customer experience as well. And so by focusing on the employees and getting feedback from them, you are going to have a positive impact on the customers. And so if you had to choose one, I would say the employee experience. Most dealerships are going to be providing, I think, some core benefits, right? Like healthcare insurance, et cetera. But I think to become competitive in the marketplace, a lot of our dealers have started to offer like wellness packages. In this case, like some of the dealerships were offering, you know, supplementing gym membership, incentives or programs for like if people quit smoking and stuff, which then obviously reduces like healthcare insurance. So there was like a win-win there. Trying to think what other ones, but basically they were identifying what was important to them as far as those benefits go, like what they were using, what they weren't using, and then also trying to get, when they talked about like the compensation, they talked about benchmarking, compensation analysis, is that the staff didn't really have a clearer understanding of like how much were they really, you know, getting paid, not just through their salary, but also through these benefits that they had as well, and sort of realizing, wow, I had a lot more here than I thought I did. Yeah, so the few that are, you know, the one I'm thinking of in particular, and there's actually a couple of them, both had in fact done this more in-house. So typically, like the president or CEO, depending on the title, was sort of at the head of running this program. I think a lot of dealers tend to mimic them off of other dealerships. So if you have sort of like a peer group or a 20 group that you participate in, I think that would be a good place to start to have a conversation around maybe what some other dealerships are doing. But they were all sort of, I would say, internal processes, right, led by the leadership in their organization. And so that's a really good question. I don't think I know of anyone right now that's using an outside third party for that process. Thanks everyone for attending today. My contact information is here. So if you have any additional follow-up questions that you may want to ask or want to schedule some time to meet to review anything that we discussed, feel free to reach out. As I said at the very beginning, we love to at least hear and try to help dealers as it relates to the solutions that we offer, or even beyond that, right? So any challenges you may be facing, feel free to contact us. We'd love to have a conversation.